to talk us through how experiences like Sean's can be captured when it comes to assessing the true value of cancer treatments that he spoke about. I would like to introduce now Christine Cockburn and Dr. Colman Taylor. Colman is the Chief Vision Officer at HT Analysts, who developed the social return on investment analysis for the Counting the Cost report. Colman is a healthcare reimbursement and impact expert with a background working across government, industry and academia. And Christine is the General Manager of Rare Cancers Australia. Christine is a health sociologist who is passionate about patient education and empowerment. She currently oversees the delivery of patient support programs and resource development at RCA. Welcome, Christine and Colman, for the conversation.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you, Sean, for that profound address. I'm just going to get myself together after that. Thank you. Colman, so you and your team created the methodology and conducted the research that has gone into the report we're launching today. The societal return on investment is a methodology that is not very well understood, so we'll just talk through a little bit of what it is and what it isn't, just especially so that the audience can understand it, and really specifically that patients and people with a lived experience can understand what it's doing, what it's trying to do. So one of the questions that comes up, you will have heard it before, is that the societal return on investment is simply putting a dollar value on a life, which we can all agree would be offensive. Is that the case?
So I'm glad you started with the tough questions first. So in order to understand that question, I think we need to probably start with what SROI is and how we build the analysis, because effectively SROI is just a methodology for comparing two alternatives, and it basically takes into account the costs and benefits of those alternatives using a clear and sort of transparent framework. There's a number of steps involved, and that includes starting with stakeholders and understanding what really matters. From that implicit understanding of what matters, we understand what changes, and we build that picture of what changes, and then we value what this means. Because along the way we collect all of this rich qualitative data, we have those patient stories, which can be conveyed to to a general public audience as well as decision makers, etc. But we also build that bridge between the qualitative and the quantitative outcomes, so that we have those monetary outcomes that can speak to decision makers, and the ROI metrics that we can use for those decision makers, etc. The methodology's been around for a couple of decades. It started as a tool really for governments to value social grants and programs. And the reason why it was created is because it's really hard to measure what comes out of these social grants and programs. Think about a program that you might run in an Aboriginal community in far North Australia, like trying to understand what the outcomes of that program are really difficult. So SROI became useful in healthcare because it addresses really a couple of key limitations, is a better word, with traditional economic evaluation. Number one, it starts with the stakeholders, like I said, with patients, and it builds that understanding of what matters and what changes. And it also captures and values the things that we traditionally value, like responding to a treatment, or those clinical outcomes that we traditionally value, as well as the intangible outcomes, like the value of hope. So at the end of the day, it's incredibly difficult to put a monetary value on these kind of outcomes, hope, etc. But the current system that we have just ignores these outcomes, and that's unfair.
So why do we put a monetary value on it? Why are we translating the things that matter into a monetary value?
We're translating into that monetary value so we can communicate across those stakeholder groups and speak to the decision makers that that need to see this justification for investing in these technologies. You know, again, we have the system at the moment that was sort of built to make really rational decisions. Back in the day, we were talking like small molecule products that treated large sections of the population, and we needed the metrics to, you know, make those rational decisions. But treatments have changed. You know, we've moved on from those small molecule products, statins, blood pressure medications, chemotherapies that treated big parts of the patient population. We've moved to targeted and potentially curative therapies. You know, you think CAR T has came up before, you think gene therapies for spinal muscular atrophy. So, you know, the way we've done things is not the way that we need to, you know, think about things in the future in order to capture these types of changes.
So why, I think we all know the answer, but why is it important to try to quantify those very difficult to measure things like hope, time, being able to raise children? Why is it important to quantify those things?
I think it's important because this is the conversation society wants to have. You know, COVID has taught us that you know, value, it goes beyond the traditional metrics that we would normally capture. If we were just looking at the efficacy of vaccines, we wouldn't have probably funded, you know, the COVID vaccines in such a rapid rate. We were thinking about hope, we were thinking about freedom as part of our decision-making matrix. So this, you know, this isn't a shift, I don't think, that's confined to healthcare. People want to have a conversation about impact. And this, you know, goes, if you think about the corporate world's been on this journey for a number of years. Some corporates are better than others, but the conversation about impact is increasing because that's a situation that we find ourselves in now, and there's this rise in, you know, ESG frameworks, environment, social governance frameworks in the corporate world, and people increasingly want to have a conversation about connection and about purpose. So, you know, at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that we're capturing what matters, and what matters is what's important, you know, to patients and the kind of family members and the society that sits around those patients.
So I guess the missing part, or one of the missing parts of the puzzle that we want to have conversations about is, hypothetically, how realistic or how challenging or how easy will it be to incorporate a measure like societal return on investment into the HTA process?
So we already do capture patient value in the HTA process, but I would characterise it as it's like a characteristic of decision making, whereas it should be really, you know, a central pillar of decision making. You know, we've gone from that world where you know, we were treating those large parts of the population to these new therapies, and we have to change really, you know, our mindset about how we do things. And SROI is just a method that builds that value from the ground up and allows the decision maker to have an implicit understanding of what matters, what changes, and, you know, attaches those monetary values to things so we can, you know, still make rational decisions, but be informed, you know, as we're making them.
So pretty simple.
The short answer is it can be incorporated now, and it is incorporated now. These types of analyses go into submissions all the time, but I think they can be too easily ignored.
Yep.
You know, at the moment, again, we have these characteristics like efficacy, safety, efficiency, which we do a really good job of looking at and evaluating, but we don't really look at impact.
Yep.
And we don't build that implicit understanding of impact. And as a consequence, we're not really understanding what goes beyond that patient. To Sean's example, you know, what goes beyond the patient into the family unit. and beyond into society. Things like employment and the opportunity to have a job, the opportunity to experience things, be present at life milestones, and things like that are just not part of the conversation at the moment.
Yeah, right. So that, speaking of Sean, and later we'll hear from Angus as well, but when you talk about a societal return on investment, my mind goes to children. So how can a tool or a methodology like this help something that is so incredibly critical to measure and difficult to measure? What matters to the children, what matters to families? Is this methodology useful in pushing things forward for paediatric oncology families?
I think it is, because I think at the moment, again, what we would measure when we're talking about paediatric therapies and new technology services, whatever it is, we talk about those same characteristics as what we talk about with adult patients. We talk about efficacy, like how this works. Is it clinically meaningful? Is it safe? Is it efficient to fund this new thing? But the conversation, again, it stops there, I think, and it doesn't go into the impact. Whereas the impact on a child's life is exactly as was communicated before by Sean and others. Yeah. It goes into the opportunity to experience these different life milestones, weddings, being present for the birth of a child, things like that are really incredibly difficult to value, but need to be part of the conversation, because again, otherwise we just tend to talk about characteristics.
Yeah. So another challenging paradigm, I guess, of cancer treatment would be some of the really complicated new therapies like CAR T therapy. So can this methodology help to measure those very high-cost, one-stop treatments that, quite frankly, patients are crying out for access to? And there's people in this room that have had many migraines trying to bring it to market, I think. Can this viewpoint, can this perspective and measurement help expedite access to treatments like that?
So again, I think the system that we have, again, was designed not for the CAR T product that's coming through now. And when we see a CAR T product coming through, the system responds, it flexes, it does eventually get through the system. But it's slow and it's clunky, because we again just talk about the characteristics of that treatment and what that might mean for patients and things like that. We don't talk about the broader impact. And with something like CAR T, the broader impact actually goes beyond, the patient, the family, etc. There's actually like a whole system that's created in hospitals in Australia as a consequence, and there's actually jobs. And there's actually like science and research that goes with it that is incredibly important, for future treatment of patients and innovation and things like this. And the system that we have is able to eventually get this through in this really clunky manner, but it's clunky because we're just fighting over those characteristics, whereas we should be thinking about, okay, what is the impact? What does this bring?
And when the HTA review is done, do you imagine a world where what we already measure is augmented by this experiential and community and family and paradigms of time? Can you imagine that that's a reality?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm struck with the parallels that kind of go on between this argument and what goes on in Aboriginal affairs, for instance, where Aboriginal people want to say in the laws and the policies that affect them. So in the same way, we want to create a system where patients are making decisions for patients, based on the best information that we can give them. And I think at the moment we don't do it justice in terms of the information that we give. We give a subset of the total information, and as a consequence, I don't think we make truly informed decisions because we don't understand what matters, and we don't really understand what the flow-on effects are. So yes, I think we can create a system where this is all incorporated, and again, the system that was designed 2 decades ago is just not fit for purpose for where we are now, sitting post-COVID in a situation where we want to think about impact and we want to think about, the future that we can create that's inclusive and has everyone at the table.
We heard a really senior decision maker from the NHS last year say that it would be good and it would be right to incorporate these things, but it's just too hard.
Yeah.
You've got less than a minute to address that.
I think I do want to acknowledge the team that worked on this at HT Analyst. I mean, everyone worked incredibly hard to understand the different perspectives and talk to the patients and understand what happened with these experiences like Sean's. But it is hard, but it can be done.
Yes.
I mean, it's not too hard to imagine a future where we could be doing this more often.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Colman.
Thanks.